Now, it's my great pleasure to ask Brian Iselin, founder of the Geneva-based non-profit organization Slave Free Trade, to speak how we could better combat human trafficking in supply chains. Brian, go ahead, please.
Michelle, great to be here again. Thanks for all the excellent commentary of my fellow panelists. Last week, for those who were here, we talked about Palermo 20 years on. Overall, my assessment was that we quite simply over-expected of it. We expected a law enforcement treaty to solve a deeply rooted global social issue of serial exploitation. And instead of that over-reliance on law enforcement, I recommended taking a walk on the demand side of the fence. This recommendation, of course, most of you will recognize flies completely in the face of everything we focused on for the last 20 years. Instead of the purely law enforcement and supply side focus that does nothing to change the dimensions or curb the growth of the market globally, in purely market driver terms, demand reduction is more effective than supply side because supply is as good as infinite. There will always be more people willing to move, wanting to move, dreaming of moving, vulnerable to being duped, possible to lure, desperate for income, and daring enough to dream of a better life. There is literally nothing we can do on the supply side that is going to have a large enough impact to measurably change the market. So here are a few brief theses for tonight for you. First one is we can prosecute, but we cannot prosecute our way out of the human trafficking problem. Secondly, when we do prosecute, it should be a strategic decision. It should not merely be assumed that that's the right outcome. Thirdly, criminal justice responses and legal responses more broadly can drive demand-side outcomes. And fourthly, enter the concept of RightsTech. And of course, I'll explain that as I go. So, prosecution is not a strongly achievable end in itself. The very, very low rate of cases that make it to court globally says we should not hold out false hope of getting many cases to court, and we should not hold out false hope of many wins in court. At the moment, all of the evidence points to the criminal justice, that a criminal justice outcome, as opposed to a natural justice outcome, is far from guaranteed in any country in the world. The sad fact is that the overwhelming majority of traffickers do not face court and likely never will. I think Kevin's figure of 99.98% is probably high. Even of those who do, the most people charged with trafficking globally are low-level actors like recruiters, who are among the most liable to be arrested. And a high proportion of those arrested for trafficking and prosecuted are those who were themselves trafficked and turned to a management role as their way out of it. So a suitable starting presumption is that not all trafficking cases should end in court. We should be circumspect in choosing this as an outcome, not assume it's the best outcome for everyone. Prosecution is just one outcome, but in the 20 years since I first uncovered a trafficking case, I have rarely ever seen a happy ending from one. I'm glad, very happy to hear that other people have seen happy endings, but if you hang around long enough, you see the tragedy that continues even long after so-called resolution of cases. In so many instances, a great deal of harm is done along the way. The victim is re-victimized, left more vulnerable than when they were first trafficked, sent back to where they came from, stigmatized, marginalized, re-trafficked, murdered, kill themselves. Human trafficking is a really special crime type. The victim is the product, the principal witness is the victim, often they're the sole witness, and the victims are often so brutalized they're not competent as witnesses. The justice system is not geared up for that. So against this backdrop, what we should be considering is when to prosecute, and making a kind of an on-balance decision not to prosecute could also be a good outcome for the people involved. Criminal justice responses and legal responses more broadly can drive demand-side outcomes, but we just need to first find a way to be okay with that. When a company is sued by former slaves in its supply chains, for example, there is a chance the company will change something as a result. When a government fines a company for human rights abuses in their supply chain, there is a chance the company will act to change something as a result. When a border agency bans the import of goods from a company because of labor violations in their supply chain, there is a chance that company will change something about its supply chain. A case like that is up now before the US courts. Mars, Barry Callebaut, Nestle, Hershey. Their litigation or private prosecutions are potentially a very effective way to incentivize good corporate behavior and disincentivize bad. However, there can never be enough of them to change everything we need to change. Importantly, though, they can send very, very strong signals that will help reduce demand. So I wanted to talk about RightsTech. If we're not going to be able to prosecute and enforce our way out of the human trafficking hole we're in, what can we do? Everybody knows the term fintech. If there was an audience here, I'd say raise your hands if you don't. Everyone knows, a lot of people know about clean tech and biotech, medtech, edtech, proptech, femtech. The list is now pretty long. Even sex tech now I came across recently. I've told it's a thing. But you know what's missing? Is RightsTech. Tech for promoting, protecting, enabling, and extending human rights. The fact is, technology is advancing at breakneck speed, spurring the appearance of a slew of neologisms like sex tech, edtech, medtech. And in the world of business, the coining of these phrases, it's happening almost daily. Over the past few years, we've witnessed a pollution of solutions or companies, especially startups, looking to leverage the new possibilities from technology. So many of you will have heard the term blockchain, for example, which is a decentralized ledger technology. And these technological advances added to a traditional sector give shape to new subsegments, whole new subsegments of economic activity that escape traditional definitions. Most of these new segments, of course, have been named by adding tech suffix to a prefix, which normally talks about their field. So we have a new mountain to explore for human endeavor, and that's RightsTech. So RightsTech is the term I use to refer to innovations in the human rights and technology crossover. Typically refers to organizations like my own, Slave Free Trade, or other services that use technology to provide human rights services to businesses or consumers, and could rightly be described to include any entity that provides human rights services through software or technology for promoting rights. Until now, you have not been participating in a revolutionary human rights experience when you go into a coffee shop and buy a coffee. But in a world in which RightsTech is a thing, all industries, including you just going in and buying your coffee, will be turned on its head. When the barista says, would you like the slave-free version, you are going to say yes. There is 100% consumer conversion to that slave-free coffee. RightsTech is the means by which we put human rights alongside commercial and other interactions in our daily lives. Think about that energy rating on your fridge or your phone, and picture now a human rights rating on your phone. And you know that sustainability rating you have on your ESG fund, picture a human rights rating on the managed fund you choose to invest in. And you know that claim by a brand to be sustainable or ethical or slave-free, but they offer absolutely no proof. Picture products with human rights labels that trigger RightsTech tools and immerse you in the supply chain of that product. That's the promise of RightsTech. It's powerful, it's convincing, and very importantly, it's evidential. It's not like any social label of the past that is just one-dimensional and doesn't provide proof. Whether you're purchasing coffee at your local coffee shop or managing your power grid, all of these other forms of tech are all around us, but RightsTech isn't. But it absolutely has the potential to be, and it has greater potential than any of these other tech sectors to date. And why? Because of the ubiquity of the human experience. One of the most important features is that with RightsTech, we are finally speaking to the right person. With rape, we spend all our time telling women to change their lives. Don't walk in the dark, don't wear that, don't get drunk. We tell them to not get raped. We aren't talking to the men saying, don't rape. So too with human trafficking, much of what we're doing is telling people not to get trafficked. We spend a huge amount of time, especially in the development assistance budgets, telling vulnerable people not to get exploited. Don't travel, don't go there, don't migrate. We're talking to only the victims, and that's as perverse a response to human trafficking as it is to rape. RightsTech means that we can talk to the potential exploiters and incentivize their way out of it. RightsTech of the sort that Slave Free Trade develops also gives us the opportunity to finally bring human rights and the bottom line together. Human trafficking is serial exploitation. It's done for commercial reasons. It's done for capitalist reasons. So for the first time in the history of capitalism, profit and loss become dependent on and inseparable from human rights performance. And RightsTech differs from every other of these tech neologisms because it's compelling. It's rooted in the human experience and the trauma. It's deeply emotional and people respond to it. It's our very best chance of changing the behaviors we want to correct in the world of human trafficking, which is serial exploitation. Now, RightsTech is democratizing. As an individual, whether singular, plural, corporate, governmental, you have power suddenly in your purchases. The City of London, when they're buying T-shirts for their bus drivers, can choose the slave-free product. The Orange County, California can do the same. And you can do the same when you buy your coffee. You are talking inadvertently through the technology to the potential exploiters, and you're incentivizing their way out of that exploitation. In the same way you get to choose cryptocurrency over fiat in the fintech world, in a RightsTech world, you get to choose to deal in rights-friendly, rights-compliant goods and services. And you get to be informed by the decision intelligence that's provided by the tech. I think it's fair to say that the vast majority of people don't really understand human rights until they start having theirs taken away. Our individual understanding of human rights might actually be described as exceptional. That is, we know when someone's impinging our rights, we feel aggrieved, even though we can't put our finger on which point of international law it comes from. So RightsTech is a way of operationalizing that. It brings the body of international human rights law, our universal inalienable rights, out in the open. It lays those rights bare to be understood in a way that we don't even need to know international human rights law to do it, not in legalistic ways, real ways. RightsTech offers an agnosticism also to things that have defined the physical world: geography, product, service, jurisdiction, time zone, ideology. When an international human rights law standard in a workplace, for example, is defined, it's global, it's universal. It makes zero difference in a RightsTech world that a country, or how a country, defines living wage. It does not matter that a jurisdiction in particular allows racial discrimination, because RightsTech brings international human rights law universal principles to bear. Universality means the standard is agnostic to local, regional, and national law. And the promise of RightsTech, the biggest promise, is transparency. This transformative kind of transparency that promises you the understanding that when you buy your iPhone, it doesn't have the broken back of 6-year-olds in the Congo. If you know a phone that doesn't have that, if you can see a phone doesn't have that and they can prove it, which one are you going to buy? It's the ultimate decision intelligence. I like to call it X-ray vision for the average Joe or Joanne. So, and let me just plug something here. At the end of next month, I'm proud to say that the world's first proven slave-free cocoa hits the shelves, the first product out of the first RightsTech project in the world. And for all of the companies in the supply chain of that cocoa, from now on, their go-to-market, their P&L, their communications campaigns, and their bottom line is inseparable from their human rights performance. And that is our best bet for ending modern slavery. RightsTech is a new field. Most of you will never have heard of it. It deserves, belongs, and deserves to breathe its own life. And it promises to lift us all up in ways we can't imagine today. In the same way, 20 years ago, we couldn't imagine what fintech would look like. But it's a promise that only if we buy into it will be realized. RightsTech does offer its hope. So I think I would implore you, let's work together to make this a thing. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Brian, for sharing your unique experience and work through your human rights intelligence platform. And also, I would like to thank you for contributing to the organization of this webinar. And the last question I think we could take tonight is from Mary Patricia Mulhall. She says, "It is so frustrating to be working in this anti-trafficking field and not see any end to it or to seem to be making any headway to tackle the crime. 40 million. When I first began this work, the figure was 27 million. What on earth are we doing wrong that we don't seem to be bringing down the numbers?" I know is a bit pessimistic. And I think it brings us also to the next series of webinar on root causes. But nevertheless, if we could briefly address this very big and interesting question, who would like? Oh, I see Brian. Yes, please.
Can I just throw in 20 cents worth? The first thing is, I would caution looking at the numbers over the years. They've changed dramatically. They're usually very badly developed. They were very badly developed when you saw 27 million. They're still pretty bad now when you see 40 million. Numbers of a covert activity like human trafficking, like all forms of modern slavery, forced labor, child labor, slavery and servitude, the numbers are usually ballpark. And by ballpark, I mean you'll get orders of magnitude. So what you're better off doing is looking at the 40 million and saying, there are tens of millions. Looking at the 152 million children in child labor, and you're better off saying 152 million, that seems pretty precise. It's actually just hundreds of millions. So that's the best way to think about the numbers. Numbers are terribly distracting in this game. And they're usually put out because policymakers can't stand making policy without being given a number to announce. UNESCO in Bangkok did a study some time ago on the numbers, actually about 15 years ago, did a study on the numbers that were being used, and they found the vast majority of numbers were politicized and usually plucked from the sky. So that's the first thing, very much caution on numbers. And the second thing is that because of that caution on numbers, you can't look at the numbers and say there's been an increase. What you can do is look at the conditions and say there's likely to have been an increase. So under coronavirus, for example, we know that the pandemic has made so many more people vulnerable that it's impossible for there not to have been an increase. That's what we can say. And going beyond that is going beyond the evidence. That's my 20 cents.
Okay. No, thank you. Thank you, Brian.